God's work, I'm learning to make that abound more and more, as he says. And it's interesting that throughout the Bible, the main impediment to holiness is shown over and over to be sexual sin, which is why Paul posts this warning sign here in verse 3. And should be a warning sign to all of Christianity in modern day United States. This is the will of God, your sanctification, abstain from sexual immorality. This isn't just fornication. This is giving in to that passion. From Genesis to Revelation, sexual sin is shown to be the main weakness that Satan has discovered within human beings, that he can exploit and cause not just the unsaved world. The unsaved world is just given over to this, if you haven't noticed. But this is the exploitation Satan uses, sexual immorality, very effectively to cause God's saints, God's children, to stumble. From the time of Noah, Noah gets drunk, ends up naked. How does that happen? Well, it happens to a lot of people, probably a lot of people tonight, Lot being drawn to the society of Sodom. He's drawn in there. The Israelites dancing provocatively around a golden calf. Drawn into the fellowship of Baal Peor, as it's called. And Israel's failure to fully annihilate the Canaanites. They just left a little bit of it there, a little bit of that temptation of the Canaanites in the land, and it eventually brings them down. That sexual sin becomes a stumbling block. Sexual sin continues to destroy the lives of God's children. And so Paul warns that it is the will of God to abstain from sexual immorality. And that each of you, he says in verse 4, should know how to possess their own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in passion of lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God. The way this reads in Greek, the phrase, your sanctification, there in verse 3, that is parenthetical. It is the overriding understood principle, my sanctification. And that is God's will for his children through specifically three things that you should, he says at the end of verse 3, abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you should, verse 4, know how to possess my own vessel in sanctification and honor. And then in verse 6, that no one should take advantage of or defraud his brother in this matter. To abstain from sexual immorality is abstaining from porneia, is the Greek word.